Nō mai, haere mai, welcome. I'm Bruce Munro, and with me is International Relations Specialist, Professor Robert Patman, and this is Global Insight. This week, New Zealand's first Minister of Space, Judith Collins, is attending a global gathering of the space community in Sydney. The space age is no longer science fiction. So what are the threats, and does peace stand a chance? Welcome, Robert.
Morning, Bruce.
NASA is preparing for human missions to Mars. China and Russia want to have their own astronauts on the moon sometime after 2030. A dozen private companies are developing their own space technologies, and Donald Trump is pushing ahead with his $300 billion Golden Dome satellite defence system. On top of all of that, New Zealand is third after the US and China for the greatest number of successful vertical space rocket launches. As the 21st century space race heats up, do we have the treaties, the laws and the agreements that would be up to this job?
Probably not. What do we have so far? The Outer Space Treaty, signed in 1967, provides the overall framework that space is supposed to be an area which mustn't be militarised, and there should not be, if you like, territorial claims in that area. And then there was the Moon Treaty of 1979, which very much focused on the moon and said the moon shouldn't be used for anything other than peaceful purposes, and there should not be the militarisation of the moon or territorial claims on the moon. More recently, and you're quite right in your introductory comments, Bruce, you mentioned that there has been a qualitative shift in space exploration. I think many of our viewers will be familiar with what was called the space race during the Cold War, which was conducted principally between the Soviet Union and the United States. What is really different about the second space race, which has really kicked in during the 21st century, is that it involves something like 74 countries, but also a whole multitude of private companies. And it's that almost congested field which is going to test out the existing legal frameworks. Now, what has been the response? In 2020, the United States, anticipating a renewed presence on the moon, established something called the Artemis Accords. This now has been signed by 43 countries. It's basically modelled to some degree on the 1967 Outer Space Treaty. And it's led by the United States. New Zealand has signed it. And it's really US-led, and it's signed by like-minded countries. It's a multilateral framework for countries which are engaged in the exploration of space. But that's led to a rival legal framework led by China and Russia. They both have plans. It's International Lunar Research Station, that's what it's called, ILRS. And this is open not just to China and Russia. They're seeking to build a joint space station on the moon within the next 5 years. China has become a major player in space and has set itself the goal of being the leading space power by 2045. A number of countries have joined that arrangement. So you've got these two rival frameworks for exploring space in the 21st century. And so, yeah, I mean, to answer your original question, we don't have a comprehensive legal framework that takes account of the conditions of the 21st century.
Right. And so all of these, there's a much greater number of players this time round, as you've said. What challenges to international relations do you see that will bring as we enter the space age?
I think the obvious one is the potential for geopolitical rivalry between the United States and its allies on the one hand, and China and Russia on the other, plus their friends and supporters. So that's a bit worrying, because it's almost like you're transplanting geopolitical rivalries on Earth to space. And space is such a challenging environment. And it does raise questions whether, if we cannot organise universally accepted laws on Earth, should we actually be going to project Earth-bound rivalries into space? I think there's a real threat of geopolitical, but the United States and China may see space as a frontier to try and establish dominance over themselves when they can't do it on Earth. That's a real danger. There's another, I think, big challenge for human beings generally, in both of the superpowers, China and Russia. There's a big assumption that the Moon and Mars is ours, but we're just in the early stages of exploring our space environment. And Helen Stofan, the NASA chief scientist, in 2015 predicted by the 2025 human beings will discover that they're not alone, and that there will be the discovery of non-human intelligence. That hasn't authoritatively happened so far, but I mean, that's going to be a major challenge. Just imagine, Bruce, in the course of this rivalry between the United States and the US, that they discover that they're much more advanced civilizations and different from us, and who may not like the presumption that we can exploit the Moon or develop Mars to our own purposes. So this is really challenging for us, because the geopolitical implications of human beings discovering they're not alone is huge. Just think about organised religion on Earth. Just think about the energy system we currently are geared to, fossil fuels. I'm sure a civilization of 1 million years won't be using fossil fuels, particularly if they're travelling across solar systems. It has huge implications for basically institutions on Earth. So, we can't rule out the possibility that in the course of exploring space, which is, going to happen, that we may have some very challenging times. I'd just like to come back to the geopolitical thing for a moment, if I may. Why are countries, and so many countries, involved in space that may not have particularly strong geopolitical ambitions? New Zealand doesn't have strong ambitions. I think that question needs to be hit right on the head, and the answer is quite simple. Is because we depend, New Zealand and many countries depend critically on satellites. So we have 3,000 operational satellites around the Earth, and they actually help our societies function. So suddenly our understanding of national security extends to space, because if anything happens to those satellites, many of our societies won't be able to function in the way they expect. So I think that's an important thing to stress, that we're seeing geopolitical rivalry between the leading powers, but we're seeing other countries involved in space, perhaps for economic gain, but also to protect their national security, which has been linked with the space environment.
What lessons have we learnt from diplomacy on Earth that we should be taking into space?
Not enough. I think if you push me against the wall and demand an answer, I would probably say the Treaty of Antarctica serves as a possible model. The Treaty of Antarctica, which was signed in 1959 at the height of the Cold War, established Antarctica as an area free of territorial claims and can only be used for peaceful purposes, and was an area where all states would be, irrespective of which side they were on in the Cold War, could go and cooperate there. So that's a potential model, and to some extent that informed the Outer Space Treaty of 1967. But clearly it's worrying when you see situations like Gaza and the Ukraine, where rules are being breached. And these rules have been agreed. When international law is breached and trashed in the way it is on a regular basis, it makes you wonder whether human beings at this stage, particularly the leading powers, are capable of sticking to rules even when they develop them. So I mean, that is a challenge. But I do think many of the lessons. I don't think Earth has too many good lessons, except how not to do it.
Right.
And there is an optimistic school of thought here. Dr. Maria Pozza, who is one of the leading experts in the world, former Otago PhD student, who now runs her own company called Gravity, international law specialist. She argues that actually the experience of trying to navigate what is a very difficult environment in space may actually tone down the rivalries and establish new interdependence between countries, which then may become a model for making life much better on Earth. In other words, we discover in space where the environment is so much more challenging that cooperation is a necessity, not a luxury. And maybe that idea could be learnt from space for Earth rather than from Earth to space.
This has been a fascinating discussion. And what does it all mean for New Zealand's future, given that we look set to become a very space-focused country?
It's an extraordinary development, Bruce. If we were having this conversation 15 years ago, I think neither of us would have anticipated that New Zealand has become a major space player. And we now have a Minister of Space, and as you indicated in your opening remarks, the third biggest launcher, I think, of the third. What was the figure you quoted? It was the.
Yep, we're behind the US and China for the most successful vertical space rocket launches. Yep.
And I think it's to do with what we've got a geographical location which is very conducive to launching satellites. We also, because of our relative geographical isolation, our skies are relatively uncluttered compared with many other countries. And clearly there's going to be big opportunities, and Rocket Lab, which was established by Peter Beck but is now a US subsidiary, although still run by Peter Beck, has established itself very strongly in this field, and I believe is tendering for business with that project, the Golden Dome project, which is, I think, worth about 300 billion New Zealand dollars. So this is a very ambitious project that the United States under Trump is launching. I think there are, for New Zealand, of course, what goes with this is the possibility of technologies which we will have access to that we may not have had access to in the same way. I think the example of Rocket Lab could spawn other New Zealand startups, and I think that's the hope, at least for many people in this country, because obviously it means more jobs and technological innovation. But I think there are challenges as well. For example, we just spoke about New Zealand becoming quite a prolific launcher of projectiles into space, put it that way. Do we have any control over that? After all, the US its Rocket Lab is a US subsidiary. So does that mean we're sending into space products which have been approved by the New Zealand government? After all, it's happening on our soil. So technically, New Zealand is the sovereign country here. I'd be interested to know whether whether there's full scrutiny of every payload that's being sent up by Rocket Lab by the government. Are some of these for military purposes? So I think we're going to have these debates. As we become more and more involved, I think people in New Zealand will want to know, is there transparency about our activities in space? What are we doing there? We haven't had a debate about the participation in the Golden Dome. Some people believe that could be negative for New Zealand's position in the world. So these are the sort of interesting debates that we probably didn't anticipate we'll be having in the 21st century, but could well unfold in the next few years.
Thank you, Robert.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching. Catch us next time on Global Insight. Noho ora mai.